taught for 25, 30 years.
Yep.
Both at the elementary school level all the way up to the university level here at Stanford. And you've led this very impactful advocacy organization for many years. What is your biggest takeaway from the last 2 days?
Well, I would say the first one is, and I'm glad John mentioned this, because I think what Adrian said on the opening panel and what my good friend Joel Klein said on the opening panel and what my former two-time student Cory Booker said yesterday at lunch, I hope is not lost on anybody here in the audience. Because the fundamental thing the takeaway for me is there's these extraordinary opportunities to marry technology and education. And as John said, you have the opportunity to bring the private sector in and to scale things now that we've experimented and built models that work to scale them extraordinarily. But the fundamental issue that I see, and I think Joel mentioned this, I think Adrian mentioned this, and I thought Cory's talk yesterday it made me very proud as a professor. I will say that. Because what he said is, and he was talking about education, but he's also more broadly talking about investing in young people and kids in this country, which we have not done adequately for well over 30 years in this country, and everybody ought to recognize that. And it's reflected in the public schools and the challenges, but it's a much deeper issue of public will. And he said, you know, this is the call of our times. This is how we will be judged as a society. We cannot afford to fail, which is so obviously clear from a global economic standpoint. But the truth is, what really sat with me, and then we have guests here from India and China and other countries who are prepared, quite frankly, to eat our lunch economically and educationally unless we as a society make the commitment we need to make. So the first thing I thought, the biggest takeaway was that unless we think very big and take very serious risks and as a group of people here who are leaders, make it clear that this must be the #1 investment imperative in our society, then all the great ideas in this room will not take us to where we need to go. So that's the first big thing that I saw and that I hope everyone will leave this conference with. No matter where you fit in the education and technology and private sector communities, it's that you go back and realize that we must do this as a society. And the second thing, I'm gonna introduce one topic that I haven't heard mentioned, but that I see at Common Sense, because, you know, we're in about 15,000 schools in the United States, and I'm a teacher, but we also look at the impact of media and technology on kids. And that's a big part of our consumer work and our advocacy platform. And the average kid today in the United States spends about 7.5 hours per day consuming media, about 10.5 hours per day if you include multitasking, which folks like my colleague Roy P. know very well. So 10.5 hours a day. I have 4 children. This is very real to me as a parent. And they're usually on this device now. There are extraordinary educational opportunities that will transform education with rocket ship type schools and with many of the other folks who are represented here. But it is not okay for a kid to spend 10.5 hours in front of a digital media device without understanding some of the cognitive development and social emotional development issues that come from digital media platforms. And this valley, the leaders of whom I know quite well through my work at Common Sense Media, has yet to step up and talk about some of the downsides of overexposure to digital media to kids. And as we go forward in building the next generation classrooms and the blended learning models and the brilliant rocket ships that John represents, you have to think through the issues that Roy P. knows or Cliff Nass here at Stanford knows about the impact of too much media exposure on the cognitive, social, and emotional development of young people. And that issue hasn't been talked about as much, and it has to be part of a long-term dialogue going forward.
Got it.
And Victor, just one quick point on that, which we also don't talk about. And a lot of times we marvel at how wonderful kids are at multitasking. And it's true, don't get me wrong. Multitasking, we know kids do very well. But I would also say that there are times when multitasking is not necessarily good. I know that students like to have a lot of different things going on at one time, and having kids, I go through this. To be working, reflecting, learning, and to have 4 other things competing for your time at the same time is not necessarily good. and that there needs to be a limit to multitasking.
Ron, we've talked about investors and entrepreneurs, educators, kids, the nonprofit, the for-profit sector. One group of stakeholders represented by many of folks here in this room today are parents, we just haven't had enough dialogue around that. I know you do a lot of work in that area. Can you tell us how can we engage parents more in this initiative to drive learning and increase our education capacity?
Well, one study that has not received a lot of attention, it was by Karen Mack, and she just completed a recent round of a longitudinal study at the University of Chicago. I'm sorry, in the Chicago public school system, and that is on the effect and the impact of parent involvement on student achievement. One of the strongest correlates of all, and believe me, the effect of teaching was actually number 2, was actually the degree of involvement of the parent as number 1. Now, that's not to say that, well, parents trump teachers. That's not the point. The point is, if you want to do well, accelerate student achievement, having the involvement of parents is such a critical piece. Little things like setting time aside for students to study, helping with the homework, getting involved in the school. It makes a huge difference. At education.com, we have spent the last 4 years building out a model that provides instant information to parents on a wide variety of topics, resources and tools, so that parents who might be too busy, who might not have the resources, who are just simply don't know, here's what you can do. Here are the resources. Here's what you need to know. Here are the top 1,000 things that parents are searching for on the web, and let's bring authoritativeness and trustworthiness to that information so that you have the best of information. But parental involvement, fostering parental involvement is a biggie.
Thank you, Ron. And Mike Milken obviously talked about this yesterday, showing how the #1 extracurricular activity for families in countries abroad with much higher academic scores than we do here in the United States is, in fact, parent-student extracurricular homework help. Now, because our time is short, because all of you have planes to catch, because I promised each of you a very focused, brief discussion, I just want to ask one last question. We've got 10 years. Let's say that is the time frame that we are talking about. If you could say one thing to people in this room, where should they focus their time and energy? Where are you going to focus your time and energy over the next 10 years to make things happen, to embrace what Michael Milken and Cory Booker encouraged all of us to do yesterday?
So Rocketship does K through 5 schools, and we have this thing called Learning Lab, which is a 2-hour period that kids spend doing individualized instruction, either with tutors or online. And it started off as kind of a nice experiment and a thing to do to kind of have both classroom and individualized learning. And we realized about 3 years ago that it was extraordinarily successful and potentially even more so. And so what we're going to be doing over the next 10 years is to really understand the limits of that. So exactly how many basic skills can a student learn in that format? Because our thesis is the more basic skills learning that is acquired that way, the more we can do in the classroom with social, emotional, critical thinking, the things that teachers do best. So moving the drudgery, the short A, long A sound, the 2-digit addition practice into this medium and focusing our classroom time on really helping children to think and develop as people, we really want to push the limits of that the next 10 years. So I really hope that people who are on the investment side think a lot about investing in technologies that make that more and more effective. And we measure the heck out of everything, and we're going to be able to tell you what works, what doesn't, what the student learning per minute is, et cetera. And so really hope that people decide that that's something worth doing.
Ron?
Frankly, at my age, 10 years is a long time. So, but I'll be active. I've been active for a lot of years now. My basic thesis is one of empowerment. Right now, we're very focused on the empowerment of parents. We want to continue to focus on that. Increasingly, teacher empowerment is very important. So at the company, we're doing a lot to give teachers the resources that they need. Anytime, anywhere, when you need a resource, we want to have it for you there. And then thirdly, access to information by students. I mean, that's basically the ecosystem. We are building out platforms today where we will do the very similar kind of a thing, that anytime, any place, anywhere learning, whether it's the parent, the teacher, or the child, that's what I want to commit the next 5+ years to doing.
Thank you. And Jim, you have the last word.
Well, I would say 10 years, I'd say that's about all we really have to actually deal with the macro level issue that we should all be thinking about here. I mean, I believe that John and Ron and some of the other extraordinary people who you guys have brought together here, Victor, will solve the next generation of building the right classrooms, 21st century learning, et cetera. I believe that there's been extraordinary growth in the last decade on that, and I even believe that Jim Shelton's boss, Arnie Duncan, has done a great job of beginning to build this at the federal level, and to build will. But I will tell you, we barely have 10 years to fundamentally change the investment priorities of this country. When we started Common Sense Media, my colleagues know this, but we didn't know the media platform would be so successful, and we didn't know the schools piece would be, because we really wanted to build AARP for children. You know, I listened to the President of the United States last night talk about the fact that we invested $1 trillion in building Kandahar and Afghanistan and Iraq. And we have not invested anywhere near the resources, whether it's at the parent level, the government level, the private sector level, in the education and broader kids sector of our society. So I would tell you, if we do not get our act together as a nation and make this our #1 priority and dramatically change our priorities, not tinker at the edges, as Joel said yesterday. I'm not talking about tinkering at the edges. I'm talking about fundamentally reorienting what matters in America. Then no matter how brilliant some of the people are in this room and how dedicated some of the nonprofit and for-profit people are, we will be a second-rate nation compared to where we are. And so to me, the one thing that must be done in the next 10 years is to make kids in education, bar none, the #1 priority for the country. Period, end of story, and have our societal values reflect that, our investment as a society reflect that, and quite honestly, parents reflect that.
Please join me in thanking Jim, Ron, and John. And now I'd like to ask Carlos Watson to come up and introduce our next speaker.
I want to thank everyone again for taking the time. This has been an incredible event for so many different reasons, and we're so pleased to have partnered with Stanford in bringing this together. I want to make a very short introduction and simply say that every now and then you come across something special that you, something or someone that you love more and more as time goes along. And this will seem a little bit like an odd sequitur, but how many of you have read any of Martin Luther King Jr.'s books? How many of you have read Why We Can't Wait or any of his other books? I love his books not only because of the substance, but because every time I read it again, I feel like I learn something more and more. Well, that's happened to me as I've gotten to know our next guest. Every time I walk away from one of our conversations, I feel like there are 2 or 3 more revelations that follow over the next several days or weeks. So I don't think there's anyone more thoughtful in education in the world. I don't have to tell you who he is. We were lucky enough to have him help kick things off, and I'm pleased to welcome, I'm going to call him my friend, Joel Klein.
That's a hell of an introduction, I must say. 2 days in a row, black guys got up here and declared their love for me. So I'll tell you, something going on in California that I got to get back here a lot more often. On a more serious note, let me start really, Carlos, by thanking you and the entire team at Goldman Sachs for an extraordinary couple of days. Let's give it up for them, really. Terrific job. And second, since love is in the air, let me take care of a little housekeeping business. Today is my girlfriend, Giselle Huff's 75th birthday. We love you, Giselle, for what you've done for education. Happy birthday to you. All right, now down to the serious business. I'm really unhappy. I hate to give the final speech at one of these conferences. You know, Adlai Stevenson once said, we've reached the point in the meeting where everything that could be said has been said, but unfortunately for you, not everybody's had a chance to say it. That's the point we are in. It's particularly unfortunate for me because I got to start yesterday, so I should be really much more grateful. But I'm particularly pissed off about the following, which I sat down yesterday with Cory Booker to have lunch. He said, what should I say? I said, well, take a look at what I wrote for my luncheon speech tomorrow and get some ideas. He took the speech, gave it yesterday, and now I'm just totally out of it right now to what to do. But I must say, we've had some extraordinary panels. The keynotes yesterday by Cory and by Mike Millikan were really special events, I thought. The panels, I know I speak for everyone how much we learned. I want to try to distill a few core ideas. Because, you know, Carlos keeps asking on every panel, he said, you know, have we reached this tipping point? Have we got there yet? Are we going to really make this happen? And I just want to be clear, this is not about his bonus and what goes on at Goldman Sachs. This is about his concern for the future of this country. See, I don't think it works that way. But I do think we're in a very different environment from the environment certainly that we were in 3 years ago. And when I started 10 years ago, this would have been unimaginable to have a conference like this. We looked at 3 areas. And interestingly, in the last panel, but we touched on it in a couple other ways. The last panel focused on the global thing. And then we talked quite a bit about the post-secondary space and a lot about K-12. It's paradoxical in a sense, and a lesson to be learned here for the next conference is, in some ways, the greatest opportunity and most interesting challenges from a business perspective are what's going on globally. There are countries now that are in such a different arc and space in their development from where we are, that have very different regulatory structures and other opportunities, that if you're just thinking solely in terms of business, that those spaces are really open up great opportunity. However, as my friend Jim Steyer just said, there's also something much more important than business going on, which is what kind of nation are we going to be? That's what was so important about Cory's speech yesterday. And I want to sum it up just like this. The question historically for all of us in this room, indeed for all of us in this nation, is whether the American dream becomes the American memory on our watch. And if it is said of us that we lost the magic ingredient in America's sauce, that kids from all over the world come here searching for a better education, more opportunity. And the key to that is education. And if we lose that, we will lose the most precious thing we have as a people. So when Jim exhorts us and Cory exhorts us and Adrian Fenty, when they try to say the fierce urgency of now, they're on to a big idea. And it's not about an investment opportunity. It's really about who we are as a nation. Now, I do think the flow of capital, as John Danner said on the last panel, matters, and I'll come back to that. But I do think there are larger issues here. What's interesting to me is our K-12 system, forgive me, is broken, and our college system is challenged. And I pointed out yesterday, our colleges have done something quite interesting because they were always competitive. They were never a government-run monopoly, and they had to compete for their kids. They have, in fact, produced what most people recognize as high quality. They've got a different challenge. What's their challenge? Their challenge now is price. It's growing at an obscene rate, and they're pricing poor and indeed middle-class kids out of the market. I'll give you one statistic that drives me a little nuts. They did a recent study, 193 most competitive colleges in America. What percent of the kids who go there you think come from the top quarter of the income spectrum? 193 of the most competitive. 2/3 of the kids come from the top quarter, and the bottom half of our income spectrum basically amounts to 15%. So what we are doing is further segmenting our society. So the college group has a price, if not a service quality challenge that they will have to address. K-12 has something very different. And I want to go over just a couple of data points here because I find this extraordinarily powerful. And we can pretend, because it makes us feel good, that we're not going to have to do things dramatically different because we don't want to injure anybody's feelings. Or we can wrap our head around the following facts. From 1970 to 2010, 40 years, okay, 2.5 times the expense in real dollars. We have increased from $1 to $2.50. in real dollar spending. We've spent that mostly on personnel. In 1970, we had 2 million teachers. Today, we have almost 3.3 million teachers. 60% growth overall, including aides and paras and guidance counselors. We've taken up the number of personnel in the system by 75%. The rest of the money went to pay enhanced salaries and a few other costs associated with this. But think about that. It's dramatic. Our results, if you look at high school NAEP in America today, we're flat in reading, flat in math, and down slightly in science. If you look at the global results, you know, people now, you get anesthetized to these things. But when you look at it in math, we're at the bottom in the global comparisons. In science, not so far from the bottom. But what's even more staggering is how far we are from the top. You know, we can be in science 7, 8 points from the bottom, but from the top, we're 40 points away. So we're not in the hunt. And the 21st century is going to be unforgiving to a people who are not prepared. I heard somebody say something to the panel this morning I thought was very right. We've got to prepare our kids for the democratic values, for the civic participation. But let me tell you, a workforce that feels its future is not going to be better, and its kids' future is not going to be better than its past. It's going to have challenges way beyond the simple issues of what a democracy and how we work. So if we don't figure out how to develop skills that are commensurate with 21st century challenges, trust me, other countries will. And the friends of mine who are leading the big global corporations tell me, we will find talent. And if it's not in America, we'll go elsewhere to find it. And the only solution, there's no other solution to this, is to train our kids to the levels commensurate with the challenge. So when you invest 2.5 times as much money, almost double the number of people, and are flat in the results while the rest of the world is moving by you, you've got to acknowledge something. Your delivery system is broken. You're not going to fire your way to success. You're not going to professionally develop your way to success. You have got a broken delivery system. Now, why is it? I always think about this. We're in Silicon Valley, right? People are up here, they're texting, they're sexting, whatever they're doing. No, it's just extraordinary. Forgive me, I'm from New York. So it's just extraordinary. You get the reference, right? No, but it's just extraordinary. I mean, there are people out here right now inventing things that are going to change the world in the next 5 to 10 years while we're sitting around here eating lunch. And that's the world that keeps America on the cutting edge. And if you look at both K-12 and college, it's amazing how resistant to innovation. I mean, the old joke is, you know, if you want to sleep 100 years ago, you woke up today, nothing has changed. One thing has changed, the amount of money we're spending has changed. But we have a broken, one could argue, pre-industrial delivery system. I'll give you one anecdote. A good friend of mine runs a major Ivy League university. So when I got the job at News Corp, he called me about 2 weeks later. He said, you know, I didn't know what the hell you were doing at News Corp, and I didn't want to call you and sound embarrassed. He said, but yesterday I met with 20 kids at this school who are my advisory committee, 20 undergraduates. I asked 20 of them, would you rather take Michael Sandel's justice course, Harvard professor, justice course online, or would you rather take the justice course we have here with a great live professor? 20 out of 20, thank you, Giselle, 20 out of 20 said they would rather take Michael Sandel online. I told this to a New York Times reporter who said to me, you know, it's funny you told me that. I actually was enrolled in Sandel's course, but he taught it so damn early in the morning, I decided to take it online instead, and it was terrific. Now, I said to the guy at the Ivy League school, I said, well, if all your kids want to take Sandel online, why don't you give them Sandel online? Are you going to get rid of your live professor? And he said, absolutely not. That's not the way we do things. There are 2 characteristics of our K-12 and post-secondary system that really are inextricably intertwined. They are resistant to innovation, and they are provider-driven. They are not customer-driven. And people who are not customer-driven are the last group in the world that are likely to innovate, to really create. And we believe, and people believe this all the time in K-12, it's just baffling to me, that there's some Wizard of Oz. You know, I played the role, so I should pretend this is doable. There's some Wizard of Oz. You can call him a superintendent, call her a chancellor, whatever you want to call it. She's going to sit there and look at these 1.1 million kids in 1,600 schools and sort of with a bolt of lightning say, just improve this a little bit or get that done. It doesn't work that way. You cannot top down manage your school system from good to great, or even from fair or adequate to good. Al Shanker, the head of the American Federation of Teachers, a couple of iterations before Randy Weingarten, said, it's absolutely true. We run the school system like we were the old communist system, right? And we say to people, you produce this much, you pay the teachers this much, class size. I used to say to people, give the school a budget and let them figure out whether they want a lower class size, have an English language academy on Saturdays, spend their money on parent engagement, and let's create a certain dynamism. And people say, no, 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 just tell us the right class size. We only go to school a certain number of hours. We do it this way. We are so backward in the way we are thinking of things. Now, I think that's not only going to change because it has to change, but it's going to change because of 3 external events that's going to facilitate the change. We've already got significant capital flow in the post-secondary arena, and that's going to have, I think, an impact. And what you see, and you've seen various people talking about it, is the traditional universities are now thinking how to partner up, all of which seems to me to be a very good thing to think about, in their view, blended and differentiated models, which I think is great. Somebody said yesterday, which I absolutely agree with, we've got to think about what a post-secondary experience is and whether it has to be the same for every kid, or we can differentiate those things. We've got to think about a competency-based world. It doesn't have to be a 4-year undergraduate degree. There may be other ways to do things. One of my proudest accomplishments was to get City University and IBM and the New York City public school system to put together a 9 to 14 school in which at the end you not only get your degree from the community college, you also get certificated by IBM. If you pass their competency test, they guarantee you a job coming out of school. It's going to open in the fall. Kids are lined up to get into it. We've got to think differently and creatively in this space. 3 things will help us drive it. Paradoxically, the fact that there are tight budget times means people have to think differently about how they spend their money. Just today on WNYC, I got up early and I was listening to this. Just today, KIPP announced that they're actually moving toward a blended model because otherwise their class sizes will become too large. So sometimes necessity is the mother of invention. John Down and Rocket Ship piloted this here in Northern California, and there's going to be a lot more creative thinking because we can't just keep investing in a manpower play that hasn't worked but that makes us feel better. That's number 1. Number 2, Common Core. Not just because they're common so that people can say now you can write content or curriculum across a large spectrum, but also because the core will be very different. What people don't fully realize is those new standards are going to create challenges for our school system that are really unimaginable right now. If we had a fully college-ready school system, I said it yesterday and I can demonstrate this, we would have 35, 38, at best 40% high school graduates today in America. And the Common Core is going to shine a deep spotlight on it. And it's not going to just be easy all of a sudden for teachers who are struggling, typically in our inner cities, to be able, in a current environment, to meet much, much higher standards. And the third thing, obviously, that will drive this thing is devices are now all different. Tablets are out there. Price points are coming down. Increasingly, schools will be wired. And there's going to be challenges in all this. But those 3 factors, the budget, Common Core, and the ubiquity of the increased possibilities on one-on-one computing and so forth, will drive that. Now, again, this is not about sitting a kid in front of a computer or taking a current textbook and digitizing it and saying it's all the same. No, this is about delivering the educational service very differently and really thinking about what you would think about in a competitive environment. What I love about Silicon Valley is all these people are out here all the time thinking about whether it's Facebook, whether it's this one, whether it's that one, how we do it. You know, Google's sitting there thinking, and we can move in this direction, and that'll attract these people from this direction. This one thing. In education, nobody's thinking that. When I was there all the time, you know what they want to know? They want to know from me, if I have 300 kids, you give me an assistant principal. If I have 280, you don't. Can you lower it to 280? How do I know whether you need an assistant principal or a left fielder? I mean, why would you even think in those terms? But it's so rigid and regulated and arresting. It reminded me all the time of Gulliver and the Lilliputians. If you tie down everything, there will be 0 room for human discretion, and then we'll expect to get good outcomes. So I think this whole new way to think about the delivery system is great. That's why I love what John did. I love the School of One. I love what happened in Carpe Diem. Not because I think any of them are the magic bullet, but because these people were willing to think differently and innovatively about a delivery system that doesn't work. 5 key points to guide, I think, the way this transformation will occur. One, indispensably, it's going to be data-driven. We're going to stop pretending that somehow we can't learn from our prior experiences how to do things better, differentiate, and so forth. You heard a lot about it at Newton, the company we own at News Corp, Wireless Generation, doing some of the most sophisticated work. Really powerful stuff when you learn about what the kid knows, how you differentiate, where the teacher's good. And let me give you an obvious here. Everyone wants to argue with me about whether you teach fractions before or after decimals, right? So this is not, to me, a religious issue. This is an empirical issue. I can tell you by studying where the kids learn better in which sequence. And it may even be, as Danner is nodding his head, he must think it's a religious issue because he's davening. But you don't know what davening is? I forgot. It's California. In Brooklyn, in Brooklyn, that would have lit up the house, man. I'm just telling you. Would have lit it up, man. All right, I'll cut it short. I get it. So, no. But it might be even different for different kids. Data will help us move this agenda. Second key point, differentiation. Not everybody has to move at the same pace. That Kunskapsskolan school you saw in Sweden, when it comes to New York next year, go visit it. Look at how they differentiate. Look at how students own their own educational experience, working hand in glove with teachers. Go see the School of One and see what they're doing. Last time I was at the School of One, it was January 14th of this year. I walked in there, and first kid I asked, I said, it was an 8th grade math class, and I said to him, it wasn't a class, it was 8th grade math group, and this kid was online doing some interactive work online, and I said to him, what are you doing? And he said, oh man, I'm so happy you asked me. I said, why is that? He said, because I finished the 8th grade and I just started the 9th grade. I said, what are you talking about? It's the middle of January. He said, yeah. I said, but I finished the 8th grade. I said, what happened last year? He said, well, last year I got so bored I got in trouble in school. So then I decided, man, I'm out of here. They sent a kid from Central Casting. I'm not going to ask him. So I see a kid furiously texting. I said to the kid, what are you doing? He said, I'm texting my tutor. I said, where's your tutor? He said, Mumbai. I said, can I ask you, is this tutor in Mumbai better than the teacher you had last year in math? He said, are you kidding me, man? He said, this tutor is totally focused on what I'm doing and where I am. He said, my teacher get around to me once every 2-3 weeks. So it's got to be customized. Third thing we've got to realize is it no longer is going to be a teacher-driven, classroom-driven, textbook-driven world. All of those models are going to change. You can deliver things virtually now, and there's no reason in God's green earth we shouldn't. You can deliver things through tablets. Kids can take them home. This Kunskapsskolan, easy for you to say, school that I was talking about. When I went there, I met a girl whose mother had a kind of job where one day a week she had to be out of town. She couldn't leave the kid alone. She took her. This kid was online on their portal and never missed a beat when she was traveling with the mother. We can extend the day without extending the day in school. We can extend the year. That's the empowering role of devices, and we've got to stop thinking that the classroom is the only locus of instruction. And the fourth and fifth, the two pieces I think are most exciting, is the way we deliver instruction to children. Here's where highly interactive, adaptive software built on very sophisticated data platforms can have an enormous, enormous impact. I have seen these kinds of things. You saw some of it yesterday with what's the one who works with your Dreambot. But you will see more and more people flow into this space, and it doesn't eliminate the human piece. We'll come to that, but it's a critical supplement. You know, people want to say the platitude, there's a lot of great content out there. There's some great content out there. There's a lot of content out there that's awfully, awfully ordinary. Too much of the content that I have seen is what I call self-referential content. Not content that drives kids toward learning, but drives kids toward describing their own experience. We can take the Michael Sandel thing is dazzling. We can take the Michael Sandels of the world and adapt them, bring in interactivity, enable a kid to differentiate, and create a terribly exciting environment. We can create a world of avatars within the software, and then ask ourselves, and this is critical to the delivery system, where is the value in human capital? That is the highest value. You know, yesterday in the newspaper, I thought it was amazing, the Wall Street Journal, because I've been thinking about this a lot. You know, Milton Friedman, many years ago, he walked into an Asian excavation site, and he saw all these people digging with shovels. He said to the guy, why are you digging with shovels? Why don't you use machinery? Why don't you use an excavator here? You know what they said to him? They said, well, because if they dig with shovels, we can hire more people. You know what Milton Friedman said? Well, why don't you give them spoons if that's your objective? But that's what we're doing in K-12. No, Randy, you're laughing. But that's what we're doing in K-12. We have never thought about the quality of the human capital. We've only thought about the amount of human capital. And if we don't make the right trade-off, what you want to do, as they do in any place, is isolate the unique value, the genius piece, and make that the human capital. And those things that are routine, that's where you want to make sure that computers and other things, not that that denigrates it, but that that helps you empower the human capital. So that when somebody, I can remember this, I can remember a law school professor who made me think harder about something than I had ever thought about. You know, somebody told me today they had a question about what do teachers do this, and there's all these things in human terms and caring about you and high expectation. But to me, my great teachers made me think about things at an entirely different level and kept telling me I hadn't thought hard enough about them, long enough about them, tough enough about them. And that is a unique human role that we can layer on top. So what we think about is not the amount of human capital, but the quality of the human capital in order to deliver. Those 5 things, I believe, are the transformative levers. And let me end on what I think is an interesting sort of note yesterday. Yesterday, Randy, who is, as you can see, I have a complex relationship with her, but it's actually, I have a lot of fondness for Randy, but she said something that so many people come up and say, why did she say? And they said, well, she said, she don't think there should be for-profit in public education. That somehow it all ought to be freeware and so forth, you know. And it just seemed to me to be an interesting observation. First of all, of course, there's lots and lots of for-profit in public education right now. But why did she say that? Because up until now, the for-profit has always been adjunctive to the delivery system. And if the for-profit enters the delivery system, you will see a very different discussion. And what's important about that is the only real threat to the status quo. You see, the work that the not-for-profit charters and others have done in this space, it's been brilliant. But without the capital investment and the ability to scale and bring in human capital to challenge these issues, no matter how good these CMOs are, they will never move at the pace that our nation needs. And so Randy is very smart about this. She understands, because the status quo is a status quo that works quite well for the adults in the system. And she understands that true disruption can only come if we bring capital flow and real scalability into the system. And so that's why she said what she said. So let me end on an optimistic note, but first caution you. Many years ago, when I was an outside lawyer for the American Psychiatric Association, I had to make speeches, and you always have to start with a joke. And you know, if you're good at jokes, you don't become a school chancellor. So I just memorized one joke, and it was, you know, at that point it was big raft of light bulb jokes. My favorite light bulb joke was, how many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? And out here in Northern California, you get this. The answer is only one, but the light bulb really has to want to change. Now, what I have learned in a decade in this business is the light bulb, the school system, does not want to change. It wants more resources, but it actually enjoys the delivery system that we currently have. The thing that makes me optimistic is that 5 years ago, I couldn't have imagined the past 2 days. And 5 years from now, the past 2 days will seem so yesterday, we will not believe it. So Jim, the answer to your question is, you gave us a decade, and I think we will accomplish it in sooner time. It won't be easy, it won't be steady, there will be setbacks, but there are forces in place that I think are more powerful now than the forces of the status quo. And you can feel those tectonic plates shifting. And one of the key indicators of that is when people who are in charge of the status quo come in and say, I want to make sure there's no capital flow, no for-profit in that space. It's a pretty good indication that they see the tidal wave coming. Thank you for a wonderful couple of days.
Hey, can we have one more hand for Joel Klein, please? I hope he's right that 5 years from now this will seem antiquated, but in the meantime, I want to thank a number of tremendous people who've helped this come together, and if you wouldn't mind standing if you're here, I'd be very appreciative. The Dean of the Business School, obviously, Garth Soliner, the Dean of the Education School, Deborah Stipek, Bethany Coates, Chris, I'm going to mispronounce your last name, I'm apologizing, Diegmeyer, Bernadette, I see Bernadette close by, Amy Shapas, Amy Yuen. I want to also thank Murdad Azim, Johnny Walton, Chris Wolf, Zach Jensen, Arjun Narayan. I also want to thank the wonderful students who helped us put together the student videos that you enjoyed, Tiffany Hung, Eric, Kevin Lee, and Ray Leon. And then from a number of wonderful Goldman folks who helped also build the impossible. Louisa Ritter, where's Louisa? Stanford Business School grad that she is, probably making good stuff happen elsewhere. Krista Martin, Jennifer Sue, Wendy Lynn, Denny Belrose, wonderful Peggy Gillen. Where's Peggy Gillen? I hope Peggy's here. She's back there in the sunshine. Inga Len, who's also back there in the sunshine. Stephanie Burke. Where's Stephanie? She's busy, still making sure this works out. Heidi, I see Heidi back there. Thank you so much. Joe Laurie and her British accent, very much appreciated. Thank you so much. Lynn, where's wonderful Lynn? Lynn is somewhere close by, still making good stuff happen. Renee Fong. And I also want to thank, and I would love for them to stand up if they would, Jen Sue. Where's Jen Sue? Where's Jen? Oh my goodness, she is still working hard making stuff happen. And Victor Hugh, where's Victor? I want you guys, I have to tell a story. I appreciate everything that everyone did, but you should know about 4 months ago, we were worried, we were in disarray. We sounded confident on the phone, President Hennessy, when we talked to Stanford folks, but we were in classic disarray. And Victor, who had been chief of staff for one of our groups, in fact, the whole West Coast, as reward for being chief of staff, got 2 months off, came back, saw the mess in the kitchen, and basically cleared everyone out, namely people like me who weren't being helpful, and said, give me 2 weeks to make magic. And that's why we're all here. So big hand, please, for Victor Hugh and Jen Sue. And with that, I will turn it over to Deborah Stipek, our partner in making all this happen.
I just want to add my thanks to all the people that have made this happen. And one thing that has not been mentioned, I think that we've had extraordinary panels and inspiring speeches. Nobody has mentioned the incredible food. And I would really like to thank Goldman Sachs, because I want everyone to know that this was thanks to Goldman Sachs for food that those of us in university aren't used to having. So thank you very, very much. I have the pleasure of introducing my boss and originally I was thinking he was going to be making closing remarks, and then I realized the word closing is really not appropriate in this context, because this has been an opportunity for all of us to be inspired, to be informed, and to be recharged. And so I see this not as a closing of this event, but really as a launching of the next step. I have seen so many business cards exchange hands that I know that there are many, many new partnerships and new connections that are going to be more powerful than any of us working in the silos that we often work in. clearly this opportunity to partner with Goldman Sachs has taught me just how fun and effective and powerful a private sector, public sector partnership can be. So I'm jazzed, and I'm looking for many more opportunities to make these kinds of connections and do this kind of collaboration. One of the things that I have most liked about this day and a half is that, yes, we did spend a little time moaning about the problems of public education, but we spent most of our time talking about the solutions, the incredible innovative work that is going on in this country and around the world. And the sort of level of optimism and engagement, and I feel ready to charge forward. I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm delighted that John Hennessy, the president of Stanford, is going to play that role of launching us forward onto that next step in those new partnerships that we've formed here. Just a word about my boss here. There are many people in this country who have claimed to be the education president. They're all imposters. We have the education president. Woo! I know of no person, whether president of a country or of a university, who understands more deeply the complexity and the opportunities in the education world than John Hennessy. I know of no president who has made K-12 education one of the cornerstones of the focus of our work, not for the School of Education, but for the entire university. That is so extraordinary in this world. I mean, all of you know where education lies in most universities, and it's a very different, Stanford is a very different place. If all schools of education, teacher preparation programs enjoyed the same support, the same understanding that we enjoy here at Stanford, thanks to John Hennessy, we would have the best teachers in the world throughout the country. So I'm really delighted to be in a university that appreciates the importance and the urgency of this issue, and that is willing to put its time and resources and energy into addressing those. So, John Hennessy. Yeah, you need my-
Sometimes the role of a university president is overstated and their ability to have influence. So the way you should think about a university president is like a caretaker at a cemetery. There are lots of people under him, but nobody's listening. When I think about the challenge that we have in education and in K-12, as well as in higher education, one thing always strikes me as a fundamental dilemma, an anomaly. How can we have the best higher education system in the world, the best, 15 of the top 20 universities, 60 of the top 100 by world surveys in the United States, and yet have one of the worst K-12 systems in a developing country? And that's a conundrum we should all think about. Why does our higher education system work so well? First of all, it's competitive. Publics compete against privates, compete against for-profits, and we all compete against one another. We all compete for students. We compete for faculty. We compete to ensure our alumni get great jobs and go on to become great contributors to our society, and hopefully give us a nice new business school every now and then. We also have a great deal more freedom from government regulation in higher education. Now, let me say there are some storm clouds on the horizon here that we have to worry about. We do have thoughts that we ought to be regulating what a credit hour means to a student, which is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. How are you going to count a credit hour for a student who's in a chemistry laboratory versus a credit hour for a student who's in a history course versus a credit hour for a student who's in a creative writing course? It doesn't make any sense. Or we're going to have gainful employment. There's a very simple solution to the federal government's legitimate interest in protecting the investment that it makes in higher education. By the way, that's a very large federal investment when you put Pell Grants together with guaranteed loans, and we potentially have a loan default, which while not quite as big as the S&L crisis, will be something that overwhelms higher education and the federal funding if we don't solve it. There's a very simple solution. Make institutions responsible for 50% of the cost of a loan default. You will immediately see institutions be more selective about the students they admit. They'll be more careful about them graduating. They'll be more careful about giving them the skills that they need to get jobs. I guarantee this will have a very hard time getting through Washington, but it's exactly the kind of reform that would fix our problem. We also, of course, have the inverse problem in our public state institutions than we have in public education. As Joel pointed out, we've spent more on our public education K-12 systems. In the state of California, over the last 20 years, the amount given to the UC system on a per-student basis has fallen by 40%. We're going to take the best higher education public system in the country, and we're going to cripple it. Because not only do we cut the budget, but at the same time, we add new regulations to what they can do, how they can structure things, what tuition they can charge, how they can take students. It's going the wrong way. We all understand the dilemma that the states are under, paying for increased costs of Medicaid, other programs, and of course the financial issues that exist. But if we're going to reduce the amount that we contribute, we should reduce the amount of regulation that we impose on those institutions. Set them free, let them compete. And California is not in a leadership position in this. Michigan and Virginia are in the leadership positions. California should be a leader in it too. Let's get down to the K-12 system. Think about what happens at our best universities, how competitive it is to get a faculty position. And tenure isn't something that you get automatically. Tenure is something that you work very hard to get. Stanford, less than half the incoming faculty. And we're already picking. Each faculty member, there are probably on average 50 applicants with PhDs from top institutions for every faculty position we hire. Half the people who arrive at Stanford don't earn tenure. So, and by the way, you are at the institution that's responsible for creating tenure. It was created to protect academic freedom because Jane Stanford tried to fire a faculty member for his political views. It wasn't created for job security, and it certainly wasn't created to be given after 2 years if you don't do anything really terrible. So we need to fix that part of the system. Joel argued that we're spending a lot more money, and there's no doubt we're spending more money on teachers, but we're spending it the wrong way. The good news about what's happened in the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years, one of the most hopeful things is that we've now gotten to evaluating reforms on the basis of real measurement. If you think about what happened before, we were in a system where, well, our schools were broke, we've known this for a while, what do? Well, small class size is the answer. Longer class day is the answer. Smaller schools rather than bigger schools are the answer. We're now getting to the point where we have real data. We can study schools, we can study reforms, we can make measurements, and we can adjust for socioeconomic factors so we can look at what really works. What really works? Teacher quality, teacher quality, teacher quality. Get teacher quality right. Get parental involvement wherever you can, certainly. But understand that that's going to be a challenge in some communities where you've got lower incomes, you've got single-parent homes, and we owe those kids a good education, just as we owe a kid who has 2 college-educated parents a good education. So teacher quality is the core thing we need to focus on. It was probably pointed out earlier, why is it that the Scandinavian countries choose their K-12 teachers from the top quartile, and we choose ours from the bottom quartile of college-educated people? Simple. We have lost the professionalization of our K-12 teacher corps. We need to turn them back into professionals. We need to treat them like professionals. It needs to be the case in this country that if you say you're a K-12 teacher, that's as good as saying you're a college professor. And it's not at all like that. It's not that way in compensation. It's not that way in respect that we give people in society. We need to re-professionalize the teacher corps. That means, first of all, attracting better people, paying them better, putting in a merit system, eliminating tenure. That doesn't mean you can't have long-term contracts, you can't have rules against indiscriminate firing. You should have all those protections. And they exist in the private sector, they exist in universities, but you don't have to have a system that concludes after the basis of 2 or 3 years, you're a great teacher and therefore you're going to be there forever. Put in merit-based pay. All the universities in the US use merit-based pay systems. Put in merit-based pay. Evaluate teachers. Use a complex evaluation. It's not just about standardized tests, that's a factor, but it's about having somebody who's really qualified as a principal or a superintendent who can go in and observe and help that teacher improve. It's about mentoring and investing in these young teachers. And it's about understanding how to educate and prepare them better. This is an important research area for the universities to get involved in. How do we help produce better teachers? What should we be doing? Well, since most of our teachers are not going to have the privilege of coming to a program like STEP, they're going to be educated in a 4-year bachelor's degree program that grants them some kind of teaching opportunity. We have to understand what we can do to educate them better. Do you know one of the most amazing facts is that if you go look at schools that produce large numbers of teachers, they spend less educating a teacher than they do on all the other parts of the university. They spend more educating an engineer, they spend more educating a scientist, they spend more educating an economist, they spend more educating a business major than they spend educating a teacher. What does that say about the value we in society are putting upon this incredible important job, upon these people that we go and trust our kids to? That's where we really need to focus. If we could improve the teacher corps, if we could make it professional, if we could really attract the best and the brightest and keep them in the profession, give them sabbaticals. After somebody's been teaching for 10 years, give them a month off to go back to a university, to get re-energized, to learn about new topics, to learn new teaching skills. Think about it as something that we're investing in as a country. If we can turn that around and begin to attract those kinds of people, then we know we can trust our young people, the next generations of them. But we are in a race against time. This conference simply wouldn't have happened more than a few years ago. So I have to thank our friends at Goldman Sachs. I have to thank all of you for coming. And I think we should all go out committed to do a better job. It's about the future of our country and the future of the world we live in. Thank you.